Good morning, all. Now I'm going to welcome Dr. Aparajita Mondal in second session of second day. Dr. Aparajita Mondal completed her PhD from Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science in 2016. Her PhD dissertation work was mainly based on the light management in the theme solar cells. After her PhD, she was joined IIT Bombay as a postdoctoral researcher. She was a recipient of the prestigious Best Fellowship to work as a visiting scientist at the University of Delaware, USA. She has more than 8 years of first-hand research experience in the field of solar voltaics, both modeling and simulation, and solar cell fabrication. Currently, she works as an INSPIRE faculty in the Experimental Condensed Physics and Institute of Physics, Bhubaneswar. With this short biography, I'd like to request Dr. Mondal to take that session. Please, Dr. Mondal.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Panda, for that nice introduction, and thanks everyone for joining. In this session, I will mainly talk about operation principles of silicon heterojunction solar cells. So let me start with a very brief introduction of the fundamentals of a solar cell. As we all know, a solar cell is a device that converts sunlight into electricity. And in order to do so, it uses a semiconductor material that absorbs the sunlight and creates a photogenerated electron in its conduction band and thereby a photogenerated hole in its valence band. Now, in order to extract meaningful power to the lines connected at the end or at the terminals of your solar cell, it is very important that these photogenerated electrons in the conduction band and this photogenerated hole in this valence band travels in the different directions. Otherwise, what will happen if these electrons and holes are traveling in the same direction along the same path? Then we are eventually extracting nothing. We are extracting no power from the solar cell. So it is imperative, because this electron and hole pair is actually neutral when they are in pair. So it is very important for the designing of a solar cell that these photogenerated electrons and these photogenerated holes travels in different directions. So if you are designing a solar cell, what you will look for? You want some kind of internal force inside your solar cell device that actually helps in separating out these electrons and holes. Now see this particular example. Here the silicon is used as an absorber layer, and the built-in potential that generates at the interface between the P and N type silicon, that is at the interface between the P-N junction, is that internal force that helps in separating out the electrons and holes. So this is a typical example for a homojunction conventional silicon solar cell, where the built-in potential works to help in separation of these photogenerated carriers. In heterojunction solar cell, there is a different kind of internal force, I would say, that helps in separation of this electron-hole pair, and we will discuss in detail about this in this talk. Now, if I am designing a solar cell, what I look for is to maximize the carrier generation. That means the photogenerated carrier should be as large as possible. The number of carriers should be as high as possible. And I don't want any recombination loss. That means I don't want the photogenerated carriers to recombine and get lost. Then obviously I want the photogenerated electrons, after separation from its hole, will travel nicely to its electron transport layer. In this case, in this particular example, this is the photogenerated hole, which after separation travels towards this hole transport layer and gets collected to the external circuit. And these are the electrons that after separation by this built-in electric field goes towards the electron collecting layer at the back and gets collected to the external circuit. So we want this carrier separation and collection to do very nicely inside my device structure. So what is the maximum amount of power that we can get from a solar cell? The maximum amount of power that we can get from a solar cell is expressed by the efficiency. This Pin is the power that is coming from the sun, and each parameter of this equation can be intuitively understood well if we look at the current voltage characteristics of this solar cell. VOC is the open circuit voltage. That means it is the maximum voltage that you can extract from this solar cell when it is in open circuit condition. That means there is no load connected and the terminals are in open. ISC is the short circuit current. That means this is the maximum current that you can get from your solar cell if both the terminals are shorted. Now, obviously, we are not going to operate our solar cell either in short circuit condition or in open circuit condition because we want some power from the solar cell. So once we connect a load to extract or to use the power that your solar cell is generating, then this maximum power point, this point is called the maximum power point. That tells you the maximum power that you can extract to your load. Now, what about this fill factor? This term called fill factor. What about this? Actually, when now your device is working, your solar cell is giving power to its load, there are some internal resistance that comes into play in the path of the electrons and holes traveling across the device. So the overall internal resistance effect reflects in this fill factor value. And by seeing the current voltage characteristics, you can tell how much fill factor you got for your solar cell. So if your solar cell is more square, if your IV curve is looks more square, then your fill factor is good. And if the fill factor is good, then your efficiency will also be high. Now let us see if you can set a one-to-one correspondence with the physical processes that is happening inside the solar cell structure and the electrical parameters that we have just talked about. So if you can manage maximum carrier generation inside your semiconductor absorber, that means you are actually enhancing the short circuit current. And if there is very less recombination loss means you are losing very less amount of photogenerated carriers by recombination, and the carriers are separating nicely across the junction. That means you are improving your open circuit voltage. Obviously, the maximum value of the open circuit voltage is limited by the band gap of the semiconductor material. So if you are improving the open circuit voltage, that means you are moving close towards the maximum value possible. Now, if the carriers, the photogenerated carriers are traveling nicely across the device and going towards the load, that means that your collection and transport of the carriers is good, then you are improving the fill factor. So let us see the present status. So among all the solar cells, different kind of solar cell, different technologies of solar cell available. So the highest record is held by silicon heterojunction solar cell. You can see this. This is the highest efficiency solar cell. This is the IV curve of a highest efficiency solar cell so far, with efficiencies greater than 26% and over a decently large area. The area is around 180 centimeters square. So such high efficiency is really very interesting because it actually keeps our hope towards the sustainable developments of producing green energy. But obviously, this also comes at a cost. Now, if we break down the production cost of making a crystalline silicon solar cell, what we will see that almost 40% of the total cost of producing a crystalline silicon solar cell comes from making a metallurgical grade silicon and converting the metallurgical grade silicon to solar grade silicon. And then from the solar grade silicon to make solar grade silicon wafers. So almost 40% of the production cost is involved in producing a good silicon wafer only. So you can actually reduce this part of the cost by using a very thin crystalline silicon wafer. In fact, in this particular record efficiency cell, the people have used 200 micrometer thin crystalline silicon wafer. That is really very good actually. But the beauty of heterojunction is that it not only holds the high efficiency, but it can also reduce the production cost. Now, let's look at this region. This region indicates the production cost that a silicon solar cell takes while making a crystalline silicon single junction solar cell from the solar grade wafer. So once you have a solar grade wafer, you are converting it or you are fabricating the solar cell from that wafer, right? So almost 90% of the cost lies in the fabrication process. Heterojunction solar cell technology has a promise in reducing cost in this part. That means if you are employing heterojunction solar cell technology, you can reduce the fabrication cost of your crystalline silicon solar cell to a considerable amount. So obviously, this is a very interesting technology, and I believe it works our interest. Now let us go again to the basic. So what is a heterojunction? A heterojunction is a junction between two dissimilar semiconductors having unequal band gaps. So in this image on the left hand side, we are having a semiconductor 1 that has band gap Eg1, and we are having semiconductor 2 with band gap Eg2, and this is prior making the contact. So obviously the Eg1 is greater than Eg2. Now, if we make a metallurgical contact between these two semiconductors, we end up with having a heterojunction at the interface. Now, because of their difference in the electron affinity, or rather the difference in their work function, there is a band bending at the hetero interface, which is obvious. But in addition to this band bending, there is some kind of band discontinuity at the interface. The discontinuity in the conduction band is called the conduction band offset, and the discontinuity in the valence band is called the valence band offset. And we will see later how this valence band and conduction band offset plays a major role in designing heterojunction solar cells. Now, not only solar cell, but why such heterojunction technology is so popular? Not in solar cell, it is popularly applied in photocatalytic water splitting or any other optoelectronic devices. Why this technology is so popular? So to answer this question, let us look at the heterojunction device structure and compare it with a homojunction counterpart. Now, what happens if you have a homojunction solar cell? That means the absorber and your carrier collection layers are made of same material. So if it is your crystalline silicon N-type, then you have a P-type crystalline silicon material as your carrier transport layer, or making a junction with your crystalline silicon N. So in this kind of homojunction, if you are making a solar cell out of this homojunction, what you will want, as we have discussed, we want these photogenerated electrons and these photogenerated holes to travel in different direction. We don't want these two carriers to travel in same direction and get lost. So in order to separate this electron, we want this to travel towards the N side, that means towards the electron transport side. And we want this hole to go towards the P side, that means to the hole transport side. Now what happens in a homojunction solar cell? This electron can travel very nicely towards this N side because it sees no barrier for its transport. And hole also travels very nicely towards the right side, that means towards the hole core transport size, because there is no barrier for the hole to transport. But if this electron diffuses towards this junction, there is always a higher probability that this electron can overcome this barrier and get recombined in this wrong side. Why I am telling this as wrong side? Because as we have seen, we don't want this electron to go in the opposite direction or to the same direction to that of the holes. Similarly, same thing is true for holes. In a solar cell, we don't want this hole to overcome this barrier that it sees while diffusing from this absorber layer to the wrong side, that means to the electron transport side, and get recombined here. Now, what happens in a solar cell, or in a heterojunction solar cell? You have these photogenerated electrons and you have these photogenerated holes. These electrons can travel nicely towards this electron collecting layer because there is no barrier. But if this electron diffuses near the hetero interface, it sees, depending on the conduction band offset, this is your conduction band offset that can appear in this heterojunction. Depending on the value of this conduction band offset, this electron sees a very high potential barrier for its travel to the wrong side. Similarly, depending on the valence band offset, if this electron diffuses towards this wrong contact side, that means towards the electron side, electron transport side, this hole sees a very high valence band offset. Therefore, the probability that this hole will recombine this barrier is very, very less if you compare this with the probability to that of the homojunction. So we can see there is some kind of induced selectivity inside this carrier transport layer that blocks the transport of the wrong carrier to enter inside it. So the incorporation of heterojunction inside a solar cell actually helps in blocking the photogenerated carrier transport to the opposite contacts. Now the obvious question that should come is that which solar cell output parameter actually gets benefited from this kind of selectivity. We have talked about open circuit voltage, we have talked about short circuit current, we have talked about maximum power point of a solar cell, we have talked about field factors. What is the electrical parameter that actually directly gets benefited for this kind of carrier selectivity? So interestingly, it is the open circuit voltage of your solar cell. So if you are having a heterojunction solar cell and given the other all losses are constant, in a heterojunction technology, you have promise of getting very high open circuit voltage compared to a homojunction technology. Why I am saying this? Because if you look at the equation 1 that describes the open circuit voltage in terms of some diode parameters, this N is the ideality factor of the diode, K is the Boltzmann constant, T is the absolute temperature. Now let's look at this bracketed region. This IL is the light generated current inside your solar cell. And what is this I0? This I0 is the saturation current of your diode, of your solar cell diode. So now, obviously, if you are making a solar cell out of an N or P absorber layer, and you are having some kind of doped layer of opposite doping to make a junction for creating that internal force to separate out the electrons and holes, you end up with having a diode inside your solar cell. Be it a Schottky diode, be it a Shockley diode, there is a PN junction diode inside your solar cell structure. When light shines on this diode, what happens? Let us see at this equivalent circuit. This is the equivalent circuit of a solar cell. When light shines on the solar cell diode, IL shows you the light generated current. This is shunted by a diode, that is the solar cell diode. So if you look closely, or you might be knowing already, the output current of a solar cell that we get across the load actually flows in the opposite direction to the diode current. So what is this diode current? So whenever there is a voltage that is developed across your solar cell, this voltage makes this internal solar cell diode forward bias. So we are talking about under illumination. Under illumination, what happens? There is obviously certain amount of voltage that is getting generated in your solar cell. This voltage, this is the positive terminal of your voltage, this is a negative terminal of your voltage, and the current is flowing in the outside load through positive to the negative terminal, just like a battery. Once this voltage is developed inside your solar cell, this voltage makes that internal diode forward bias. What happens in a forward bias PN junction diode? The current that flows in a forward bias diode can be expressed by this equation. This is a very popular, well-known equation. And if you see, this I0 is the diode saturation current that we usually encounter when the diode is operating in forward bias. This saturation, this term is same term that appears in the VOC equation. And what I am saying here is that if you can reduce the recombination or reduce the transport of these carriers towards the wrong side, if you can block the whole electrons to flow towards the whole transport side, and if you can block the holes towards flowing to the electron transport side, you are actually reducing this I0. You are actually reducing this diode current or the saturation current. So obviously, if this I0 is less, your VOC will increase. Now we know about how heterojunction is benefited, or how heterojunction helps in achieving good VOC of a solar cell. Now let us see how to choose a material or what are the properties needed in a material that we want to apply to make a heterojunction with a crystalline silicon or with any kind of absorber. So in the right hand side, this image, this is an absorber layer that is here to absorb the sunlight, and I have employed a heterojunction to collect holes in the left hand side, and I have employed an heterojunction to collect electrons in the right hand side. So it is obvious that whenever this hole transport layer in the left hand side is there, that means the holes that should flow to this hole transport layer sees no barrier for its flow, right? And once it crosses this junction, it should flow very nicely across this hole transport layer and get collected to the outer circuit. So the primary requirement for this hole collecting layer is to have high conductivity for holes. And in order to remove any barrier across this transport at the junction, we require very less or ideally zero valence band offset at this interface. Similarly, as we are collecting electrons from this heterojunction, from this heterocontact, we want this electron to see no barrier across its flow across the junction. So we want zero conduction band offset, but we want to block the holes to flow. So we need a very high valence band offset at this junction. This electron, once it crosses the junction, it should flow or it should transport through this electron transport layer very nicely. So this electron transport layer should have high electron conductivity. So this electron conductivity of this layer should be high. So these three are the basic requirements to design a heterojunction solar cell. So we are talking about high conduction band offset for blocking holes and zero conduction band, zero valence band offset for hole transport in one side of your solar cell or of your absorber layer. And we are talking about a zero conduction band offset for transport of holes and very high valence band offset for blocking the holes from the other side of your absorber layer. But unfortunately, these are not the only requirements. Let us see. Okay, so before I discuss about the other requirements for a heterojunction, let me show you the real silicon heterojunction solar cell structure. In the left hand side, this figure A shows a silicon heterojunction solar cell. Here, this is the crystalline silicon wafer that works as an absorber layer. And this ASiH is called amorphous silicon that is making heterojunction in the both side of your crystalline silicon wafer. What is this amorphous silicon? This ASiH is the amorphous form of silicon, and we will talk in detail about this in my next session. But for this time being, please know that this amorphous silicon has higher band gap of the order of around 1.7 electron volt compared to the crystalline silicon. So obviously, when this amorphous silicon is in contact with your crystalline silicon, which has band gap 1.2 electron volt, we are having a heterojunction. In this particular example, the p-type amorphous silicon forms the hole transport layer at the front side of this heterojunction solar cell to collect holes from the front fingers. And this n-type amorphous silicon layer is forming heterojunction and electron transport layer to collect electrons from the back side of this crystalline silicon absorber. Now, if you wish to compare this heterojunction with a conventional silicon homojunction solar cell, this is the image of a silicon homojunction solar cell, where again we are having an n-type crystalline silicon, but instead of depositing any material on the top of this crystalline silicon, what we do, we diffuse this crystal already n-type crystalline silicon with a p doping or high p doping to get a p plus layer. And this p plus layer is the crystalline p plus layer. That what I mean by this crystalline p plus layer is that this p and n junction is actually a homojunction because we are not changing the material. We are just doping the crystalline silicon material with a different dopant. So this is a typical example of a homojunction solar cell. Now, to continue with the requirement of the carrier transport layers or carrier selective layers in a heterojunction solar cell, let me introduce a very important concept. 1 minute. Why it is not? Okay, just 1 minute. Okay, so let me introduce a very important concept called passivation. This passivation is a very important concept in silicon technology. It is not only for silicon solar cell. This passivation is very important concept for transistors also. So let us see what a passivation is. So in a crystalline silicon bulk, what happens? The silicon atoms are arranged in a periodic manner inside the crystalline silicon bulk. So silicon having valency 4, it makes bonds with the 4 neighboring silicon atoms to form a stable structure. But what happens at the surface? At the surface, what we actually do is we break the periodicity, and in the place of a missing silicon atom, now we are having a surface silicon atom with an unpaired lone electron. And this results in a defect that is very electrically active, and they can work as trapping site for charge carriers. So for a typical crystalline silicon wafer, the surface defect or such trap states could be in density as high as 10 to the power 14 per centimeter square per electron volt. So this is quite a high density. If you keep your silicon wafer untreated, that means if you keep these dangling bonds, these are called dangling bonds. If you keep these dangling bonds untreated or unsaturated and make your device, whether you make a solar cell or you make a transistor, you will end up with a very degraded device performance. So what is the prime requirement? The requirement is that somehow you have to passivate or you have to saturate these dangling bonds. How to saturate these bonds? As we have seen, there is a lone pair electron associated with the surface atoms. If by any means you can make this electron or you can make this silicon surface atom to make bond with any other atoms, then now they are forming a stable bond. Now, how to do that? If you are going to deposit some kind of material, for example, here the amorphous silicon is deposited on the crystalline silicon. So this layer needs to be deposited in such a way that at the surface, each of the trap states is making, or each of the lone pair electrons in the surface silicon atom is making bonds with the atoms of the deposited layer. So this shows a fully passivated silicon surface, but it is an ideal condition. It is not actually so easy to get fully passivated surface. It is very tricky one to achieve experimentally. So in real surface, if you can manage to reduce the defect concentration to 10 to the power 10 centimeter square per volt, then you are good to go with any kind of device structure. So now if we go back to our requirement, now it is obvious that when we are talking about silicon heterojunction solar cells, other than having suitable conduction and valence band offset, the another requirement is that the heterojunction material needs to make or needs to passivate all the dangling bonds or defect states sitting at the crystalline silicon surface. Otherwise, what will happen? Otherwise, the photogenerated carriers inside your solar cell or inside your crystalline silicon wafer will get recombined and you will not get a decent solar cell output. So this kind of recombination at the defect states sitting in the surface is called surface recombination. So we want to minimize this surface recombination by minimizing the surface states, and this process of minimizing the surface defect states in the silicon wafer is called passivation. Now, this is not only the recombination process that is happening in your crystalline silicon wafer. Other than the surface recombination that we have already just talked, there is a bulk recombination that happens inside the crystalline silicon wafer. Now, this has nothing to do with the heterojunction. This bulk recombination is something inherent to the crystalline silicon wafer. So, to some extent, we can't avoid. So, these bulk kind of recombination events can be categorized in 3 processes. One is called radiative recombination. And we all know about this process where the photogenerated electron relaxes down to the valence band and gives off the energy in the form of photon that has energy equal to the band gap energy of the semiconductor. So whenever this electron is recombining with the hole in the conduction band or valence band, we are losing the charge from the solar cell. So this kind of band-to-band recombination is called radiative recombination. Another recombination that is highly doping dependent, doping of the semiconductor. So this is called OJ recombination. In this recombination, the electron in the conduction band, in the process of its relaxation to the hole in the valence band, the energy is sufficient enough to knock out one electron from the bottom of the conduction band to high energy in the conduction band. And in a very short time scale, this excited electron will again come back and thermalize to the bottom of the valence conduction band. So this OJ recombination is very prominent in heavily doped semiconductors. Now let us see the most important type of recombination process, that is called the trap-assisted recombination, and this is called Shockley-Read-Hall recombination. What happens in this kind of recombination is that if you have a trap state sitting in energy in between the forbidden energy of your semiconductor or within the band gap energy of your semiconductor, there is a high probability that this electron will relax down or get trapped by this trapping or defect site. Now this electron is sitting in this trap site, and there are two ways by which this electron will recombine with a hole and get lost. So one possibility is that the hole will, from the conduction band, will get activated to the trap site and recombine with the already existing electron here. And another possibility is that the electron will again thermalize, or again relax into the valence band and recombine with the hole sitting there. So anyway, we are using the electron hole. We are using in charge. And this kind of trap-assisted recombination is very actually dangerous for the health of a solar cell. We are now, please remember that we are talking about bulk recombination. That means recombination that happens inside the crystalline silicon wafer. So if you choose a very good quality wafer with a very less level of impurity, very less level of defect states, it is possible to reduce this trap-assisted recombination. Now, if you remember the surface recombination that we have talked about, this surface recombination, we have seen that it happens via the trap states sitting at the crystalline silicon surface. So this kind of surface recombination can also be described by this Shockley-Read-Hall type recombination, which is a trap-assisted recombination. Now, once we know all the processes, let us see what is the overall recombination rate inside your crystalline silicon bulk. So, inside the crystalline silicon volume, if you combine all the recombination processes, we end up with the overall recombination rate inside the bulk, and these can be expressed in terms of the lifetime, carrier lifetime. Carrier lifetime is inversely proportional to the recombination rate. So if you add all the lifetime of carriers associated with radiative recombination, Shockley-Read-Hall recombination, OJ recombination, you will get the lifetime of your carrier inside your wafer. Now, obviously, you would like to go for a high lifetime wafer because this will give you more time, or this will give your carriers, photogenerated carriers, more time before they get recombined, so that you have sufficient time to separate it out and transport them to respective contacts. Now let us see the lifetime associated with each of the process. Silicon being an indirect band gap semiconductor, the radiative recombination rate inside a silicon, that is the band-to-band recombination rate inside the crystalline silicon, is very less. That means the lifetime associated with this radiative recombination is quite high. It is around 41 milliseconds. And these, I can calculate, anyone can calculate. There are standard equations to calculate this lifetime values. Now let's look at the OJ recombination. Depending on the doping level of your crystalline silicon absorber, and for use in solar cell, usually 10 to the power 15 per centimeter cube doping level is used. For that particular doping level, the OJ recombination lifetime for the carriers, or for the photogenerated carriers, it is also quite high. It is around 23 milliseconds. Now let's see the Shockley-Read-Hall recombination. If you are having a good quality silicon, or if you want a good quality silicon wafer to choose to make a silicon solar cell, you will look for the Shockley-Read-Hall recombination lifetime of around 2 milliseconds. And this depends on what? This depends on the density of the trap states. This depends on the capture cross section of the trap states and many other factors. Overall, it depends on the silicon wafer quality. Now putting all the values in this equation, what we get, we end up with the overall carrier lifetime in your crystalline silicon bulk to be around 1.77 millisecond. Now see, clearly the overall lifetime of your carriers inside your crystalline silicon is limited by this trap assisted recombination process. So now we know what is the bulk recombination, which is determined by your wafer quality. We know the surface recombination that is determined by the passivation quality. Now let's see the effective carrier lifetime. That means now you have a carrier, you have tried to passivate now you have a silicon wafer, let's say you are having a silicon wafer and you want to you try to passivate the surfaces of the silicon wafer. Now what would be the carrier lifetime inside such a passivated wafer? So this can be termed as the effective carrier lifetime. Again, it is a combination of the volume lifetime and the surface lifetime. So putting all the values, if you have chosen for 2 millisecond lifetime of the bulk crystalline silicon and the passivation quality of your surface gives you around 3 microsecond of lifetime at the surface, effectively you end up having the lifetime of your photogenerated carrier inside your silicon to be very, very less of the order of 3 microsecond. So what this indicates? This indicates that if you want to choose a very good quality crystalline silicon wafer having very high bulk lifetime to make your solar cell, and obviously that is what you look for, but you cannot passivate the surface. That means the surface recombination rate is very high. Then you are again losing everything, because finally your effective lifetime of the carriers is determined by the quality of your surface passivation. Okay, now let us talk about a very important concept. So we have talked about carrier lifetime inside or within your crystalline silicon structure, but this lifetime is associated with which type of carriers? I mean, you are having photogenerated electrons in the conduction band, you are having photogenerated holes in the valence band. What is the carrier? Which carrier is actually giving you this lifetime? I mean, this lifetime you can associate with which carrier? Is it the lifetime of the electrons? Is it the lifetime of the holes? Or is it so that the lifetime of the photogenerated electrons and holes are equal? This is very important. Let's see. Interestingly, it is actually the minority carrier lifetime. It is not about electrons lifetime. It is not about holes lifetime. It is about the minority carrier lifetime of the photogenerated carrier. So let's take an example. In this picture in the left hand side, this is after the photogeneration or after this semiconductor has absorbed sunlight. So obviously we are using a N-type semiconductor because the number of electrons in the conduction band is much higher than the number of holes in the valence band. Now, after photogeneration, we have created some holes in the valence band and some electrons in the conduction band. But as it is very much clear that the recombination is limited by the availability of the holes, and these holes, if this is an N-type semiconductor, this holes is the minority carriers in an N-type semiconductor. So even if we think that the carrier lifetime associated with electrons and holes, this is associated actually with the minority carriers. So the recombination rate in your solar cell structure can be expressed by this equation, which is proportional to the excess density of your minority carriers. In this particular example, given the semiconductor is N-type, the minority carriers are P-type or holes. So the takeaway from the whole discussion is that if we are looking for making a very good heterojunction silicon solar cell, we will look for crystalline silicon, excellent surface passivation of crystalline silicon wafers. And this passivation should be achieved by the heterojunction material we are going to deposit on top of this crystalline silicon. And the heterojunction material should also have suitable valence and conduction band offset with the crystalline silicon. Now, there are several experimental techniques available to quantify the important parameters. That means by the important parameters, I mean the minority carrier lifetime or the interface defect densities or the band offsets at the heterojunction. So because of this time restriction, it is not possible to talk about all the experimental technique, but let me introduce a very nice and beautiful setup or measurement technique to quantify the minority carrier lifetime inside a crystalline silicon wafer. Okay, this is called quasi-steady state photoconductance measurement, and the idea is actually similar to the common idea of calculating carrier lifetime, where you are monitoring photoconductance once you switch on the light. So there should be an increase in the photoconductance of your material once you switch on the light. And once you switch off the light, there should be a decay in the photoconductance. And from this decay curve, it is possible to estimate the lifetime of your carrier. So this x-axis is time. So the carrier lifetime, if you are having a very slow decay of the photoconductance with time, that means you are having high carrier lifetime. So similar concept is employed in this photoconductance, quasi-steady state photoconductance measurement. And this is particularly useful for silicon solar cell technology, where we are having a flash lamp to illuminate your crystalline silicon test wafer. This silicon wafer is sitting on a stage, and we want to monitor the change in the photoconductance within this crystalline silicon as a function of the flash lamp intensity. Okay, so what essentially this overall system will give me, it will give me the change in the photoconductance of the crystalline silicon wafer as a function of the flash lamp intensity. It is not that we are switching off the flash lamp. Actually, it is calculating the photoconductance change as a function of the flash lamp intensity. So the intensity of the flash lamp determines how much photons are incident onto your crystalline silicon wafer. Okay, how to determine this photoconductance change? So below this stage, there is a RF bridge circuit, and one of the arm of this RF bridge circuit, that coil is inductively coupled to the resistivity or to the resistance of this crystalline silicon wafer. So whenever there is an increase in the conductivity or conductance of this crystalline silicon wafer, this RF bridge circuit generates an equivalent voltage proportional to the change in the photoconductance. And the rest of the circuitry processes the data and gives us finally the lifetime of the photo-generated minority carriers inside this test wafer. So if this is an N-type wafer, you will get the lifetime of holes inside this silicon wafer. How this system does that? So as I already mentioned, the RF bridge circuit is actually monitoring the change in the photoconductance. Or rather, if I say this is the photoconductivity for a particular flash lamp intensity, this is obviously a function of the mobility of the carriers, photogenerated carriers, and the number of the excess photogenerated carriers. So this is the excess photogenerated electrons, and this is the excess photogenerated holes, the number of photogenerated holes and number of photogenerated electrons. W is the wafer thickness, E is the electronic charge, mu N is the mobility of the electrons in that particular silicon wafer, and mu P is the mobility of holes in that particular silicon wafer. If you look closely, this number of photogenerated electrons and the number of photogenerated holes are equal, right? So this equation simplifies into this, where this delta or this photoconductance we get from the RF bridge circuit voltage. We know the mobility of electrons in a given crystalline silicon wafer. We know the mobility of holes in a solid silicon wafer depending on its doping. And this thickness of the wafer is also known to us. So from this equation, given that this bridge circuit is giving us this parameter, we can calculate the excess carrier concentration generated inside your crystalline silicon wafer because of this flash lamp illumination. Right? Now, if you know this delta N or the excess carrier concentration, then you can calculate the lifetime of the minority carrier from this equation. Now, what is G in this equation? G is the generation rate. So we know delta N from this RF bridge circuit, but we need to calculate the generation rate in order to calculate effective lifetime from this measurement. To estimate the generation rate, this system employs a reference photodiode very close to the silicon wafer. So once there is a flash lamp that is on, this photodiode can actually tell you the number of photons that is incident onto your crystalline silicon wafer. So this the responsibility of this photodiode is to tell you how much photons is incident on the crystalline silicon wafer depending on the flash lamp intensity. Once this computer knows how much photons are incident on the crystalline silicon wafer, from the already available data sheet of a property of crystalline silicon and given thickness, this software can calculate how much photons out of this incident photon this silicon wafer can generate, or how much photon this silicon wafer can absorb out of this incident photons. So this absorption ability of the crystalline silicon is computed by the software and already available data, and those data gives us the generation rate inside the crystalline silicon wafer. So from the reference cell, we are calculating the generation rate. From the RF bridge circuit, we are actually getting this excess carrier concentration, and then we can use this equation to calculate the effective carrier lifetime from this generation rate and carrier concentration. This is a very simple and nice looking setup. This is the actual setup, how it looks like. This is particularly useful for measuring silicon wafer lifetime, because for silicon wafer, the benefit is that these parameters, that means the mobility of electrons and holes, are very well known to us. Okay, so let's see what is the output of this kind of simple device, simple measurement system. So from the output of the setup, what you have a plot of effective carrier lifetime as a function of the injection density. So the x-axis is injection density. What is this injection density? It is the number of excess carrier generated inside your silicon wafer. And obviously it depends on the number of photons that is incident on it. So as I already mentioned, the recombination rate of the photogenerated carriers or the minority carriers is proportional to their excess carrier concentration. So with increase in the excess carrier concentration, we can see a dip, or we can see a drop in the lifetime value as the excess carrier concentration increases. This equation is very important to remember because it might not be that much intuitive. If we are having high excess carrier density due to the photogeneration, then the recombination rate of the excess carrier should also be high. So the effective lifetime drops with the injection density. Now, another very important or very interesting idea we can get from this curve is that the rate curve is plotted for the carrier lifetime from a 100 ohm centimeter resistivity crystalline silicon wafer. And this yellow curve is plotted for 1 ohm centimeter resistivity crystallized silicon wafer. So overall, for a wide range of injection density, what we can see, the effective lifetime of the photogenerated carriers that you always want to be high is much higher in the high resistive crystallized silicon wafer than in a low resistive crystallized silicon wafer, right? So high resistive crystallized silicon wafer gives you high lifetime compared to a low resistive one. Why this is so? So high resistivity means what? High resistivity means the doping density inside your wafer is less. So doping is anyway a kind of process of incorporating impurity inside your material. So again, if you have high impurity, the lifetime will obviously be less. So with the doping density, lifetime drops. Now the final comment. If you want to choose a crystalline silicon wafer to make a solar cell based on the effective carrier lifetime that the wafer can give you, which doping density will you choose? Will it be 1 ohm centimeter? But this will give you very less lifetime. And will it be 100 ohm centimeter? That means a relatively high doping density, high resistive wafer that will give you very high lifetime. From at this point, actually, it seems intuitive to go for a high resistive wafer because it will give you high carrier lifetime. But the choice is not that much easy and straightforward. Actually, it is a bit tricky one, and we will talk about in detail in my next session. So before I end this session, let me tell you another thing is that, as I already showed you, this is the IV characteristics curve of a record heterojunction silicon solar cell. And I have also shown you a typical device structure of a heterojunction solar cell. But let me mention that this high efficiency of around 26% is not actually coming from this kind of heterojunction structure. It is true that this efficiency is from a silicon heterojunction solar cell, but it is not coming from this structure. So what is the heterojunction structure? What is the heterojunction technology employed in crystalline silicon to get such high efficiency? Let it be a secret till my next session. So thank you for your attention. Hello. Hello. Hello.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Mondal. Now session is open for the question answer.
Yeah.
If anyone have any question, please ask to Dr. Mondal.
Hello.
Yeah.
Madam, it's a nice presentation. Thank you very much for this kind of information. So I have a actually I have a question regarding the carrier lifetime measurement. So first, maybe very basic question. I mean, just I want to know. I have a confusion regarding that. That is, there any? I mean, if I want, you have shown the carrier lifetime measurement for the bulk. Is there any? If I want to measure the minority carrier lifetime for a monolayer or few layer substrate, so is that the same equation I should follow, or is there anything else? There is another kind of I mean mechanism is there. If I remember, that is Langevin recombination. So is there? So I want to clarify from you that what kind of I mean measurement or the measurement equation I should follow for the measurement of carrier lifetime in case of monolayer or few layer samples.
Okay. Thank you for that question. Actually, during my talk, if you see my screen, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so what I have shown here is a typical example of how a lifetime, minority carrier lifetime is measured in a crystalline silicon wafer.
Yes.
So this lifetime is effective lifetime. That means this lifetime actually considers the combination of the bulk and surface recombination. Okay.
Yes.
Now this is typically true for silicon wafers only. And
Okay.
as your question is based on, as you want to know the lifetime process, measurement process in a very thin monolayers.
Yes.
So obviously, this process that you can see in the screen will not going to work for you. Okay. So what you have to do is you have to follow the conventional process of estimating the carrier lifetime. If you can see the right hand image in the screen.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So here,
Yes.
yeah. So for any kind of semiconductor,
Mhm.
the rate at which the photoconductance gets decayed depends on the
Period
lifetime,
lifetime.
lifetime of your carriers. So
Mhm.
if the decay is quite fast, you are having very less lifetime. If the decay is quite slow, you are having a less high lifetime, right? So
Mhm.
it is the inverse slope of this photoconductance or inverse slope of this photoconductivity that indicates your lifetime of the carriers. Now, how to measure that? So broadly, I can tell you, you can look some literature on that. Is that if you can set up some kind of pulsed lamp system where you can switch on the light
Yes. Yes.
and switch off it, and you measure the decay rate.
Exactly.
So for a few monolayers, the rate of decay should not be constant across your whole time scale. So you might be having some 2 or 3 lifetimes across your length or across your
Mhm.
decay time.
Mhm.
So in that case, in short, I'll say these equations actually holds true for any kind of semiconductor material.
Yes.
But
Like,
as for
just
crystalline silicon, as for crystalline silicon, these mobility values are known. Na? So this is very easy to calculate the lifetime from here. But for your monolayer or 2-3 monolayer sample, if the mobility values are not known properly, and it is true for most of the practical cases, so you can't this equation actually.
please, can you please? I'm curious about that slide where you have shown that the monetary lifetime equation, that is 1 by tau bulk is equal to 1 by
Yeah.
Auger recombination and
Yeah.
so can you please? Yes. This side.
This-
So this 1 by tau volume is nothing but 1 by tau bulk. That is the
Right.
area lifetime of the bulk. Yes.
Right.
So then it is the recombination and the Shockley Ridgewell and the Auger. So,
Right.
I just want to say, if I want to transform this equation for a not surface, it is a kind of material. So bulk means you have some thickness. So I have a layer which has no thickness. I mean the 2D layer. So
Right.
in that case, the same equation will be followed or anything that we have to add. Like
Okay.
I have some
Okay.
read somewhere that is there is a Langevin
Yes.
combination is there. So how can that can be incorporated in this equation? That thing I want.
Okay. What I can suggest here is that
Yes.
actually I calculated this. If you can see my screen,
Yes.
this I told that this additive recombination in the silicon bulk is 41 milliseconds.
Exactly.
This OJ is 23 milliseconds.
Exactly.
So giving the Shockley Ridgewell, depending on the energy level of the trap, is 2 milliseconds. How I calculate all this? There are standard equations, and those equations obviously incorporates the factor thickness. Okay. If you want to know in more detail or exact equation which I have calculated, please email me. I will share with you the doc file that I created to calculate the lifetime values of such amount, and I will share with you that actually calculates. So that equation holds or contains the thickness value. Obviously, for the thinner wafer, you are having less area
Exactly.
generation. and it will obviously going to affect your tau or lifetime. So my advice will be you should look at the exact equations for each of this recombination process. Then we will came to know how you can use it for your purpose. So please drop me an email. Please drop me an email.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Is there any other questions?
Good afternoon.
Yes. Yeah.
So you just say that by you are improving the lifetime. Do the characteristics of the solar panel increases?
Yeah, the efficiency increases. If we can keep the lifetime high of the photogenerated carriers, the efficiency increases. And more specifically, if I want to say this, actually it improves your open circuit voltage. Okay, we will discuss this in detail in my next session. So the high lifetime of your photogenerated carriers improves the open circuit voltage of the solar cell.
Okay. So do the lifetime affects the movement of holes in the collector region, absorption region?
Yeah. Actually, yeah. If I am not wrong, you want to ask if in this particular example, if holes are collected from the in silicon to the hole collecting layers, right?
Okay.
So your question is that if the lifetime of holes in this hole collecting layer is important or not, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this is a very important and interesting question actually, because if you remember what I mentioned is that the lifetime is associated with not only electrons, not only holes, it is associated with the minority carrier. Okay, so now for this particular example, the p-type silicon is the absorber layer. It is actually absorbing the sunlight.
Okay.
And the thickness of this n-type layer is exaggerated. It is a quite thin actually. So what happens when the electron hole pair is generated? Electrons are minority here, right? Electrons are minority in this p-type layer, right?
Yes, yes.
So when the electrons are here in this absorber layer, it is the lifetime of the electrons that matter. But once the electron travels successfully to the respective transport layer, this transport layer is n-type, right? Because it is an electron transport layer. So the electrons are no longer minority in this layer, right?
Yes.
So now we are not talking about the lifetime. We are talking about in terms of dielectric relaxation.
Okay.
That means how carriers travel through a layer having the majority carrier of the same type, right? So now, once your carriers are in these carrier collection layers, the lifetime is not important anymore because now your carriers are become majority carriers.
Okay.
Am I answering the question? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, madam, I have just
Yeah,
I
please.
saw the slide. Madam, just sorry to disturb you once again.
No.
So, this the quadrant should be the third quadrant, I think, or fourth quadrant.
Yeah, fourth quadrant. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the
Actually,
thing is that as it is mentioned, so that should be in mod of
yeah,
IS.
I fully agree with you. Actually, I have so many things to say about solar cells, and there are not only about basics. Solar cell is a quite vast kind of a device.
Exactly.
So, if I want to tell everything, I would love to. So, because of this time restriction, it is not possible.
Yes,
So, we have to arrange the talk in such a way that most of the important parts are covered. I agree with you. This IV curve that you can see in my screen is actually on the fourth quadrant.
Yes.
But
Thank you.
what usually we do when we deposit solar cell and measure the efficiency, we plot it in the mod.
Yes, that's why we also use the mod of IS. Yes.
Exactly. That's why this is the certified solar cell IV curve. Okay.
Yes.
So here you can also see that it is plotted in the first quadrant. So it is the convention to plot it like that. But you are right, it is actually happening in the fourth quadrant.
Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome.